My name is Mark Collins, and I'm what you might call a media archaeologist. Forget dusty ruins, my digs happen in thrift store bins, decaying video store back rooms, and the murky depths of online estate sales. I hunt for the ghosts on magnetic tape, the forgotten signals captured on vinyl. My holy grail wasn't gold, but the flickering cathode ray glow of nostalgia, specifically for a little local puppet show called Happy Hollow Friends. It was gentle, maybe a bit threadbare, but it was mine. And like any good forgotten relic, it had its legend, the mythical lost episode 47, whispered about on forums, a tape too strange, too broken, too something to ever air. I never thought I'd be the one to unearth it. I wish I hadn't. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The fluorescent lights of my cramped apartment hummed, casting a sterile glow over stacks of VHS tapes, milk crates overflowing with LPs, and the skeletal remains of obsolete gaming consoles. My day job designing corporate PowerPoints paid the bills, but this dusty archive of analog memories, was where I actually lived. The air hung thick with the scent of old plastic and decaying cardboard, a perfume only a collector could love. My obsession, the crown jewel of my nostalgic pursuits, was Happy Hollow Friends. Aired weekday afternoons on Channel 23 sometime between 89 and 92, the exact dates were fuzzy, lost to the pre-internet ether. It was pure, low-budget charm. Barnaby Bear, the kindly, slightly too worn host in his faded flannel vest, Willow the wise owl, perched perpetually on a painted branch, dispensing gentle, often grammatically questionable advice, Chester the cheerful chipmunk, whose hyperactivity always seemed a little frantic. And then there was Mr. Giggles. Mr. Giggles was the enigma. A clown puppet, rarely seen, never speaking. He'd occasionally just be there, propped in the background, his painted smile wide and fixed, his yarn hair a lurid orange. Even as a kid, he gave me a weird vibe. Not scary, exactly, just off. The show itself was simple, lessons about sharing, being kind, looking both ways before crossing the plasticine street. The aesthetic was quintessential public access, sets that wobbled if a puppet moved too fast, slightly desaturated colors, audio that always had a faint background hiss. But it felt genuine, infused with a quiet passion you didn't see anymore. The creator, Arthur Finch, was the local Mr. Rogers, a man who, by all accounts, poured his soul into those felt and googly-eyed denizens of Happy Hollow. Online, in the dimly lit corners of lost media forums and forgotten GeoCities tribute pages, Happy Hollow Friends had a small but devoted cult following. We traded grainy clips ripped from 10th generation VHS copies, debated the exact shade of Barnaby's vest, and, most tantalizingly, discussed the legend of episode 47. Mr. Giggles Learns to Listen. The stories varied wildly. Some claimed it was pulled due to a catastrophic technical failure, a lighting rig collapsing, maybe, or the master tape being chewed up. Others whispered of controversial content, Finch trying to tackle a subject deemed too dark for kids, perhaps involving Mr. Giggles in a way that unsettled the station managers. The most persistent, and vaguest, rumors hinted at something happening during the recording, something involving Arthur Finch himself, that made the episode fundamentally unreleasable. It was the Bigfoot of children's television, a phantom broadcast tantalizingly out of reach. My discovery happened on a rainy Tuesday. I'd scored big at an estate sale on the other side of town. The previous owner of a defunct video rental store had apparently been a hoarder. Boxes upon boxes of tapes, mostly unlabeled studio cast-offs, duplication masters, and God knows what, sat teetering in my living room. It was like Christmas morning for a tapehead. I spent hours hunched over, meticulously cataloging, wiping away decades of grime. Then I saw it. A standard black Max LT 120, tucked between a bootleg wrestling compilation and a training video for a defunct fast food chain. It had a faded, typewritten label adhered with yellowing tape. My breath caught. HHF, episode 47 master, do not air. My heart hammered against my ribs. HHF. Happy Hollow Friends. Episode 47. Do not air. It couldn't be. Could it? The label looked authentic, the type faded in a way that screamed late 80s/early 90s office equipment. The tape itself felt heavy, substantial, like a broadcast master. This wasn't some fan dub, this felt like the real article. A tremor ran through my hands as I picked it up. The weight of possibility felt immense. This wasn't just lost media, it was the lost media, the ultimate find for someone like me. Years of speculation, forum threads descending into dead ends, whispered rumors, it all culminated in this unassuming black rectangle. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I didn't just jam it into the VCR. No, this required reverence. I meticulously cleaned the heads of my trusty JVC HRS 8000U, the SVHS deck I kept pristine for just such occasions. I booted up my capture PC, routing the VCR through a Canopus ADVC 110 converter, ready to digitize this potential treasure before the magnetic particles degraded any further. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I logged into the Forgotten Frequencies forum, the main hub for HHF enthusiasts. I typed out a new thread title, Potential Major HHF Discovery. Inside, I kept it vague, adrenaline making my typing erratic. Guys, I might have something. Found a tape from an interesting source. Label suggests. Well, it suggests the episode. We'll update after viewing. Wish me luck. I hit post, the little spinning icon feeling like an eternity. Then, I turned back to the VCR. The tape slid into the loading mechanism with a satisfying clunk. I dimmed the lights, settled into my worn armchair, the remote feeling like a sacred artifact in my hand. The glow of the VCR's display read 0 o'clock. I took a deep breath, the smell of dust and ozone filling my lungs. I pressed play. The screen flickered from blue to static, then resolved into the familiar, slightly wobbly opening sequence of Happy Hollow Friends. The theme song kicked in, that jaunty, slightly off-key ukulele tune that was permanently etched into my childhood brain. But something was wrong almost immediately. The audio. It sounded like it was being played through water, a subtle warble underneath the melody. The normally bright, if faded, colors seemed to pulse, bleeding at the edges like cheap watercolor left in the rain. Barnaby Bear waved his felt paw, Chester Chipmunk did his hyperactive little jig, Willow the Owl blinked serenely. It was Happy Hollow, but viewed through a smudged, distorted lens. The episode title card appeared, Episode 47, Mr. Giggles Learns to Listen. The familiar bubbly font looked sickly somehow, the yellow text seeming to vibrate against the blue background. My unease grew, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. This wasn't just tape degradation, this felt deliberate, intentional. The episode began, ostensibly, like any other. Barnaby Bear sat on his usual log stump, addressing the camera with his gentle baritone. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Happy Hollow. But his voice. It lacked its usual warmth. There was a thinness to it, a strained quality I'd never heard before. Today, he continued, his felt head bobbing slightly out of sync with the words, we have a very special lesson. Sometimes, our friends might seem quiet, but that doesn't mean they don't have important things going on inside. Isn't that right, Willow? The camera panned awkwardly to Willow the Wise Owl. Her glass eyes seemed unnaturally large, reflecting the studio lights with an unsettling intensity. Indeed, Barnaby, she hooted, her voice sounding oddly flat, almost robotic. True listening isn't just about hearing words. It's about understanding the silence, too. It's about listening to the thoughts inside. The emphasis felt jarring, misplaced. A low hum, barely perceptible beneath the dialogue, seemed to grow slightly louder. Chester Chipmunk zipped into frame, his usual boundless energy replaced with a twitchy, nervous quality. Yeah. Like Mr. Giggles. He squeaked, gesturing towards the edge of the set. He never talks. How do we know what he's thinking? Is he happy? Is he sad? Is he okay? The cheerfulness felt forced, paper-thin, masking a genuine anxiety in the puppeteer's performance. The camera then panned, slowly, agonizingly, to Mr. Giggles. He was propped against a painted tree, exactly as I remembered him from his rare appearances, inert, silent, that garish painted smile stretched across his face. But seeing him now, in this context, felt different. The smile didn't look happy. It looked like a rictus, a permanent, unfeeling grin frozen onto chipped paint. The studio lights cast strange shadows across his round face, making the hollows of his eyes seem deeper, darker. The lesson unfolded with a growing sense of dread. Barnaby, Willow, and Chester took turns trying to engage Mr. Giggles. They'd ask him questions, pausing expectantly for a response that never came. Their dialogue grew increasingly strained, bordering on passive-aggressive. Mr. Giggles, are you sure you don't want to share your feelings? Barnaby asked, his voice tight. It's important to listen, but it's also important to be heard, Willow added, her head tilting at an unnatural angle. Chester just bounced nervously, occasionally letting out a high-pitched, unsettling giggle that didn't sound cheerful at all. The technical issues worsened. The colors would flare suddenly, oversaturated and harsh, then dim into muddy browns and grays. The audio hum grew into a distinct, grating buzz, occasionally punctuated by sharp pops and clicks. The puppet movements became even jerkier, less fluid. At one point, Barnaby Bear's arm seemed to spasm uncontrollably for a second before settling back into position. It felt less like a children's show and more like a recording of a hostage situation performed by felt creatures. Then came the shift. It wasn't gradual, it was like a switch flipped. The lighting suddenly became harsh, stark, casting long, distorted shadows from the puppets. The gentle background music vanished, replaced by a low, discordant drone, a single minor key note held indefinitely. Willow the owl turned directly to the camera, her glass eyes seeming to bore into me. "Sometimes," she said, her voice now distorted, slowed down slightly, "the silence is loud. Sometimes the thoughts inside. They scream. You have to listen. You have to listen to what's hiding behind the smile." Chester Chipmunk backed away, bumping into the scenery, his puppet body trembling visibly. "I don't like this game anymore, Barnaby," he whimpered, his voice cracking. "Mr. Giggles is. He's scaring me." Barnaby didn't respond. He just stared at Mr. Giggles, his own felt body rigid. And then, Mr. Giggles moved. It wasn't the smooth, deliberate movement of a puppeteer. His head snapped to the side at an angle that should have been impossible, the painted neck creasing unnaturally. His body jolted, a jerky, spastic twitch. The camera, seemingly acting on its own accord, zoomed in, closer and closer, until Mr. Giggles' face filled the entire screen. That fixed, painted smile seemed to stretch, to widen, mocking and malevolent. The audio track erupted. Beneath the rising drone and a deafening hiss of static, a new sound emerged. Whispering. Distorted, fragmented, layered voices, swirling just below the threshold of intelligibility. It wasn't dialogue from the show. It sounded like pain. Like gasps, choked sobs, fragments of words lost in the noise. I strained to make them out, catching fleeting syllables that sounded like help. "No. Inside. Listen." The camera held on Mr. Giggles' horrifying grin as the whispers clawed at my ears. Then, just as abruptly, the camera cut back to Barnaby Bear. He was attempting his usual sign-off, holding up a shaky paw. "Well, friends, that's all the time we..." His voice broke, thick with genuine distress. The puppet's head sagged, the hand trembling violently. He couldn't finish the sentence. The screen cut to black. Not a fade, a hard, sudden cut. Then, a burst of harsh, white static filled the screen and speakers for a solid 10 seconds before the tape clicked off, the VCR automatically ejecting it with a mechanical sigh. Silence filled my apartment, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the blank television screen. My skin felt cold, clammy. What the hell had I just watched? It wasn't just bad, or weird, or technically flawed. It was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It felt tainted, violated. The final image of Mr. Giggles' face, the sound of those whispers, Barnaby's trembling paw, they were burned into my retinas, echoing in the sudden, oppressive silence. This wasn't a lost episode. It was a nightmare captured on magnetic tape. My first instinct, despite the crawling dread on my skin, was pure collector's reflex: rewind. Analyze. Understand. My hands trembled as I slotted the tape back into the VCR, the familiar whirring sound now imbued with a sinister quality. I fast-forwarded, eyes scanning the flickering images until I reached the final, horrifying sequence. I played it again. The second viewing was worse. Knowing what was coming didn't lessen the impact, it amplified it. My focus shifted from the overt horror to the subtle details I'd missed. The way the studio lights seemed to flicker in time with the discordant drone. A shadow in the corner of the set that almost looked like a person hunched over, quickly vanishing as the camera panned. The jerky, unnatural quality of Mr. Giggles' initial movement wasn't just erratic, it looked agonizing, like something resisting an unseen force before snapping into that impossible head tilt. The whispers. I plugged headphones directly into the VCR's audio output, cranking the volume, trying to filter out the overwhelming static and drone. I strained, focusing intently, rewinding tiny segments over and over. The fragments remained elusive, ghosts in the machine, can't make it stop. Listen. Inside my head. Help me. So quiet. Smiles. It was like listening to someone drowning in noise, their pleas swallowed by the interference. Were they part of the show? Added later? Or something else entirely? The quality was different from the puppet's dialogue, raw, unprocessed, terrifyingly real. I immediately turned to my capture setup. If I could digitize it, maybe I could clean the audio, stabilize the image, isolate those whispers. I hit record on the software and played the tape through the capture device. The visual glitches seemed even more pronounced on the computer monitor, tearing, blocky artifacts, sudden flashes of lurid green and purple that hadn't been there on the direct VCR playback. The audio waveform on the screen was a chaotic mess, spikes and valleys of noise drowning out the intended sound. After it finished, I tried playing the captured file. It stuttered, froze. Sections were just pure, gray static. The disturbing climax was even worse digitally. The whispers were buried under thicker layers of digital noise, and Mr. Giggle's face seemed to pixelate and distort in ways that defied simple compression artifacts. It looked like the data itself was corrupted, recoiling from the content. Frustrated, I went back online, back to the Forgotten Frequencies forum. My earlier post had garnered a few curious replies, mostly skeptical excitement. Now, armed with the episode title and a head full of disturbing imagery, I searched again, using more specific terms. Happy Hollow Friends Episode 47, Mr. Giggles Listen. Arthur Finch Breakdown. HHF pulled episode audio. The search results were different this time. Deeper threads, older posts, mentions on obscure lost media wikis. The rumors became slightly more concrete. Multiple anonymous posts referenced technical difficulties during the filming of an episode featuring Mr. Giggles, forcing it to be scrapped. One post, dated over a decade ago, mentioned Arthur Finch, the creator, taking an abrupt leave of absence around the time the show was unexpectedly put on hiatus. It cited personal health reasons. Another user, claiming to have known someone who worked at the local station back then, vaguely recalled hearing about a difficult recording session for HHF, something involving Finch becoming unwell on set. They mentioned weird audio problems that couldn't be fixed in post-production. There it was again, the audio. The whispers. Was it possible they weren't part of the intended show at all, but something captured accidentally? Finch's voice, perhaps? Muttering to himself during a moment of stress? The idea sent a fresh chill down my spine. The thought of the kindly creator of Happy Hollow being the source of those tortured sounds. I finally pushed back from the computer, rubbing my temples. A dull headache throbbed behind my eyes. The apartment felt too quiet now, the earlier silence replaced by a ringing in my ears, an echo of the tape's static hiss. As I walked towards the kitchen to get some water, I could have sworn I heard it, a faint, high-pitched ukulele note, discordant and wrong, like the ghost of the theme song. I stopped, listening intently. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator. Later that night, lying in bed, sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Giggle's painted smile, floating in the darkness. And beneath the sound of my own breathing, I kept thinking I could hear it, a faint, sibilant whisper, just on the edge of hearing, like the tape was still playing somewhere deep inside my skull. Power of suggestion, I muttered to myself, pulling the pillow over my head. Watched something creepy, now you're spooked. But the explanation felt thin, unconvincing. The headache persisted, and the uneasy feeling lingered, a clinging residue left behind by episode 47. It was more than just creepy. It felt infectious. The infection spread quickly. Episode 47 wasn't content to stay confined to the tape or the corrupted digital file on my hard drive. It started bleeding into the edges of my reality, seeping into the mundane fabric of my life like a stain. It began subtly. I'd find myself humming the Happy Hollow Friends theme tune, only for it to warp midway through, dissolving into that discordant drone from the episode's climax. I'd be washing dishes, staring out the window, and the pattern of clouds or the grain in the wooden fence posts would momentarily coalesce into the horrifying curve of Mr. Giggle's smile, leering back at me before dissolving. I dismissed these as lingering impressions, my mind playing tricks on me after the disturbing viewing. But the tricks became more frequent, more insistent. The auditory hallucinations were the worst. During a conference call for my soul-crushing office job, my manager was droning on about synergy and deliverables when his voice suddenly seemed to crack, taking on the strained, desperate tenor of Barnaby Bear attempting his final sign-off. The words blurred, replaced for a split second by "that's all the time we," before snapping back to corporate jargon. My blood ran cold. I gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles white. The static whisper followed me everywhere. It lurked beneath the hiss of the shower, the rumble of the subway, the silence of my apartment. Sometimes, my phone would ring, and instead of the standard tone, I'd hear that chilling burst of static hiss from the end of the episode, followed by a faint, sibilant whisper that sounded unnervingly like my name. I'd snatch the phone up, heart pounding, only to find no incoming call, the screen dark. My attempts to properly digitize the tape became a technological nightmare. Each attempt yielded worse results. The capture software would crash inexplicably. Files would become corrupted halfway through the process. The glitches weren't just passive artifacts of decay anymore, they felt active, malicious. In one aborted capture attempt, The resulting file inserted random frames of pure, harsh static into the middle of scenes. In another, a single frame flashed showing Barnaby Bear's face horribly distorted, his kindly eyes replaced with the empty, dark sockets of Mr. Giggles' design. My computer itself started acting erratically whenever I tried to work with the files, freezing, blue screening, emitting strange beeps from the internal speaker. It was as if the machine itself was being contaminated. My sister, Lisa, called me via video chat that Friday. I hadn't spoken to her in a few days, lost in my obsession. Her face appeared on my monitor, concern etched into her features immediately. "Mark? Are you okay? You look terrible." I realized I hadn't shaved in days. Dark circles hung beneath my eyes, testament to sleepless nights spent analyzing audio waveforms or jolting awake from nightmares starring a silent, smiling clown puppet. Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just been busy with a new find. You know how it is. The puppet show thing?" she asked, her voice skeptical. "The one you posted about? Mark, some of the guys on that forum are messaging me, asking if you're alright. Said you posted something weird and then went silent." My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten about the forum post. "It's complicated, Lisa. It's the lost episode. I actually found it." "Okay," she said slowly. "Is it bad?" "It's more than bad," I said, the words tumbling out. "It's wrong. Seriously wrong. The quality is degraded, sure, but there's something else. Something in the recording." I hesitated, then made a snap decision. Maybe an outside perspective would help. Maybe she'd see it was just a creepy old tape and snap me out of this funk. "Here, let me show you a bit. Just the beginning, it's less intense." I fumbled with screen sharing, managing to play the first minute or so of the corrupted digital file, the watery theme song, the bleeding colors, Barnaby's strained greeting. Lisa watched, her expression shifting from curiosity to discomfort. "Okay, wow," she said when I paused it. "That's definitely creepy. The quality is awful, yeah, but the whole vibe is just unsettling." Barnaby looked stressed. She leaned closer to her camera. "Mark, honestly? This seems kind of unhealthy. You look exhausted. You're obsessing over this weird, creepy tape. Maybe you should just put it away? Erase it? It's clearly getting to you." "You don't understand," I insisted, frustration rising. "It's not just creepy, Lisa. There's something else there. In the audio. In the glitches. It's..." I trailed off, unable to articulate the feeling, the presence that clung to the recording. "Mark," she said gently, her voice laced with genuine worry. "It's an old tape of a cheap puppet show. Maybe the creator was having a bad day. Maybe the equipment was faulty. It's not cursed. Please, just drop it. For your own sake. You're starting to scare me." Her concern felt distant, filtered through the static haze that now seemed to constantly fill my head. Drop it? How could I drop it when it felt like it was embedding itself into my brain, rewriting my perceptions? The show hadn't ended when the tape stopped. For me, it was still playing. And Mr. Giggles was always watching. Lisa's worry, rather than grounding me, fueled a different kind of obsession. If the tape itself was the source of this creeping dread, then the key had to lie with its creator, Arthur Finch. The whispers on the forums about his breakdown, the station employee's vague recollection of an unwell Finch on set during a difficult recording, these weren't just background details anymore. They felt like the Rosetta Stone needed to decipher episode 47. My collector's instincts morphed into detective work. I abandoned the futile attempts at digital restoration and dove headfirst into researching Finch. Public records yielded little. Birth date, death date, surprisingly recent, only about 5 years ago, listed as natural causes at age 68, a few sparse details about his time running Happy Hollow Friends through his small production company, Finchwork Productions. The real digging started at the local library archives and online newspaper databases. Searching for Finch's name alongside Happy Hollow Friends and the approximate dates the show was on air turned up a few puff pieces from the show's launch, Finch beaming, holding Barnaby Bear, talking about his passion for gentle children's programming. But searching for mentions after the show's abrupt cancellation yielded something darker. A small article, buried deep in the local news section from late 1992, mentioned the sudden hiatus of Happy Hollow Friends, citing production difficulties. No mention of Finch directly. Another, a year later, briefly noted the dissolution of Finchwork Productions. It felt like a deliberate erasure, a smoothing over of inconvenient facts. I expanded my search terms: Arthur Finch mental health, Finch psychiatric, Channel 23 incident. Most results were dead ends. But then, A hit from a digitized university newspaper archive, an interview from the mid-90s with a former media studies professor who had briefly consulted for local stations. In a tangential remark about the pressures of low-budget television, he mentioned, "You had situations like poor Arthur Finch over at Channel 23. Poured his heart into that puppet show, but the stress, combined with his pre-existing issues. It culminated in a rather distressing incident during a taping. Very hushed up, of course. Terrible shame. Pre-existing issues? Distressing incident during taping? Hushed up? This was it. The core of the story. But I needed more than vague allusions. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a defunct Angel Fire fan page for Happy Hollow Friends, archived by the Wayback Machine. Buried in the guestbook comments from 2003 was a post signed Brenda K., former HHF intern. It read, "Loved working on the show, mostly. Mr. Finch was intense but passionate. That last taping though. Episode 47. Never aired. Something bad happened with Mr. Finch. Heard shouting, strange noises from the control room. They sent us interns home early. Whole thing felt wrong. Hope he got help. Brenda K. A name. A potential witness. It took hours of cross-referencing old social media profiles, LinkedIn searches, and educated guesses, but I found her. Brenda Keller, now a graphic designer living 2 states away. Heart pounding, I drafted an email, carefully wording my request, explaining my interest in HHF history and the lost episode, mentioning my discovery of her old comment. I tried not to sound like a lunatic. To my astonishment, she replied within a day. She remembered the incident, albeit vaguely at first. After a brief, cautious email exchange, she agreed to a phone call. Arthur Finch, Brenda began, her voice hesitant over the phone line, was complicated. He loved those puppets, loved the idea of the show. But he was always wound incredibly tight. Low budget, long hours, constant pressure from the station. It wore him down. Looking back, you could see the signs. He started talking to the puppets even when we weren't filming, seemed increasingly paranoid about the station interfering with his vision. He complained about hearing buzzing noises in the studio nobody else heard. My blood ran cold. The buzzing on the tape. That day, she continued, the day we filmed episode 47. Things were tense from the start. Arthur seemed agitated, distracted. We were doing this episode about Mr. Giggles, the creepy clown puppet he barely ever used. Arthur hated Mr. Giggles, said he didn't trust his smile. But the station wanted more recurring characters, so he wrote this episode about listening. Brenda described the filming. Finch operating Barnaby Bear, his movements becoming increasingly erratic. His voice, delivering Barnaby's lines, growing strained, tight. The other puppeteers becoming visibly uncomfortable. Then they got to the part where the puppets try to talk to Mr. Giggles, Brenda said, her voice dropping. Arthur. He just froze. He was staring at the Mr. Giggles puppet, operated by another puppeteer, just staring. Then he started muttering. Not Barnaby's lines. Just low, distressed sounds. Under his breath, but the boom mic was right there, sensitive studio mics. They pick up everything. The whispers. They weren't effects. They were Finch. Suddenly, Brenda continued, he just broke. Operating Barnaby, he started shaking violently. The puppet hand trembled uncontrollably. He let out this choked sob. Then he started yelling, not loudly, but intensely, at the Mr. Giggles puppet. Things like, why won't you listen? Stop smiling. Get out of my head. It was terrifying. The director yelled cut. But Finch kept going for a few seconds, lost in it. The Mr. Giggles puppeteer apparently panicked and jerked the puppet, making its head flop weirdly just as Finch was having his breakdown. Mr. Giggles' impossible head tilt. Finch's breakdown projecting onto the silent puppet, the other operator reacting in fear. They cleared the studio immediately, Brenda finished. Sent us interns home. The station manager came down. Lots of closed-door meetings. We heard later that Arthur had suffered a complete nervous breakdown. He was hospitalized shortly after. The station pulled the episode instantly, obviously. Ordered all copies destroyed. Said it was due to insurmountable technical audio flaws. They buried it. The show went on hiatus and never came back. Arthur. I don't think he ever fully recovered. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The strained voice, the trembling hand, that was Finch, live on camera, losing his grip on reality. The oversaturated colors, the harsh lighting shifts, maybe reflections of his agitated mental state influencing the technical direction, or just the chaos of the moment captured on tape. The discordant drone, the buzzing, perhaps tinnitus caused by stress, or auditory hallucinations Finch was experiencing, somehow bleeding into the recording or amplified by his proximity to the mics. And the whispers. Those were the raw, unfiltered sounds of Arthur Finch's psychological collapse, accidentally immortalized on the master tape during the breakdown. The tape Mark found wasn't just a mislabeled master. It was likely the master, or a direct duplication, saved from destruction by mistake or oversight, tucked away and forgotten until the video store owner's possessions ended up at an estate sale. It wasn't cursed. It was something far more disturbing, a direct recording of a human being's psyche shattering. The revelation about Arthur Finch didn't bring relief, only a deeper, more insidious kind of horror. My theory began to crystallize, moving beyond simple hauntings or curses into something grounded in psychology and the very nature of the recording medium. This tape wasn't cursed in the supernatural sense, haunted by a vengeful spirit or demonic entity. It was something else. It was a vessel. A container holding not just audio and visual information, but the raw, psychic residue of intense human trauma. Arthur Finch's breakdown hadn't just happened during the recording. In a way, it had happened onto the recording. His paranoia, his auditory hallucinations, the sheer force of his mental collapse, it had somehow imprinted itself onto the magnetic particles of the VHS tape, weaving itself into the very fabric of the signal alongside the intended images and sounds. The glitches, the distortions, the static, they weren't just decay or technical flaws anymore. I saw them now as manifestations of Finch's fractured state of mind, embedded directly into the media. The unnatural color bleed mirrored his distorted perception. The buzzing and drone were echoes of his auditory hallucinations. The jarring cuts and visual noise represented the chaos erupting within him. The whispers were the literal voice of his suffering. And watching episode 47, especially repeatedly, obsessively, as I had been. It wasn't like watching a scary movie. It was like mainlining someone else's breakdown. The specific combination of unsettling visuals, discordant sounds, and those fragmented whispers acted like a psychoacoustic key, bypassing the viewer's conscious defenses and directly stimulating the primal fear centers of the brain. It wasn't just suggestion, it felt like a direct transmission of trauma. The tape didn't just show Finch's suffering, it induced a sympathetic resonance in the viewer, triggering similar feelings of paranoia, anxiety, and sensory distortion. It was like catching a psychic virus, transmitted via analog magnetic tape. Understanding this didn't grant me immunity. If anything, it made my own deteriorating state feel even more terrifying, more real. My symptoms intensified dramatically. The vague unease morphed into full-blown paranoia. I started suspecting my neighbors were watching me, that coded messages were hidden in junk mail. The auditory hallucinations became constant. The static whisper was a near-permanent fixture beneath all other sounds, sometimes resolving into Finch's fragmented pleas, "Help me. Listen." Inside. Barnaby Bear's strained voice echoed in my thoughts. Willow's distorted pronouncements about thoughts inside felt like direct threats. Sleep offered no escape. My nightmares became vivid, terrifying replays of the episode, but with me somehow in the Happy Hollow set. Sometimes I was Barnaby, feeling my own hand tremble, unable to speak. Other times, I was just there, forced to watch Mr. Giggle's smile widen impossibly, his painted eyes following me as Finch's whispers swirled around me like suffocating smoke. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart hammering, the static hiss ringing in my ears long after I was awake. I barely ate. The thought of food made me nauseous. My work performance plummeted, I ignored emails, missed deadlines. I stopped answering calls, even from Lisa. When she texted, worried, I sent back terse, dismissive replies. How could I explain that I felt like I was merging with Arthur Finch, that his recorded trauma was overriding my own personality? She'd think I was insane. Maybe I was. My apartment, once my sanctuary of nostalgia, now felt like a prison. The stacks of tapes seemed to loom menacingly. The VCR sat on its shelf like a malevolent idol. I felt watched, constantly. Not by neighbors, but by the lingering presence on the tape. By Mr. Giggles. His silent, smiling face materialized in shadows, in reflections, in the patterns of static on the blank TV screen. I felt Finch's paranoia as my own, the feeling that something unseen was always listening, always smiling that fixed, terrifying smile. The tape wasn't just a recording of a breakdown anymore. It felt like an active agent, feeding on my attention, reinforcing its psychic imprint with each viewing, each obsessive analysis. It was consuming me, just as Finch's illness had consumed him. The show hadn't ended. And Arthur Finch's breakdown wasn't over, it had just found a new host. The breaking point came during a particularly bad night. I hadn't slept properly in what felt like weeks. The whispers were louder than ever, swirling around my head even in complete silence, Finch's fragmented agony merging with Barnaby's strained voice and Willow's distorted pronouncements. I caught my reflection in the dark TV screen and saw, for a horrifying instant, not my own face, but the wide, painted smile of Mr. Giggles superimposed over my features. A wave of icy terror washed over me, followed by a surge of desperate clarity. This tape, this thing, was destroying me. It wasn't just affecting me, it was rewriting me, pulling me down into the same abyss that had swallowed Arthur Finch. Understanding its nature wasn't enough. I had to break its hold. I had to eject the nightmare. This wouldn't be a simple matter of hitting stop or putting the tape back on the shelf. Its influence felt too deeply embedded now, woven into my psyche. This required something more definitive, a ritual of severance. Fueled by adrenaline and sheer terror, I stumbled through my apartment, gathering the elements of my obsession. The original VHS tape, feeling unnaturally cold in my hand. The external hard drive containing the corrupted digital captures. My laptop, plagued by glitches whenever the files were accessed. Even a few HHF memorabilia items I cherished, a promotional button, a faded photograph of the cast, now felt tainted, extensions of the tape's influence. My plan formed, complete obliteration. Physical and digital. I took everything out to the small, concrete balcony of my apartment. The night air was cool, but I was sweating, trembling. The static whisper in my ears intensified, morphing into coherent, mocking phrases. "You can't erase me. I'm inside now. Listen." I started with the digital copies. I formatted the external hard drive, watching the progress bar crawl with agonizing slowness. My laptop screen flickered, displaying bursts of static, corrupted HHF images flashing for milliseconds. The whispers seemed to shriek, rising in pitch. I felt a crushing weight on my chest, a sense of pure dread emanating from the machines. "Don't do it. He's still here." I slammed the laptop shut, needing to sever the connection. Then, the tape itself. The source. Holding it felt like holding a piece of concentrated misery. I had a small, metal trash can I used for ashes when I occasionally grilled out here. I placed the VHS tape inside. Lighter fluid. A match. As I struck the match, the world seemed to warp. The concrete balcony beneath my feet felt like the cheap linoleum floor of the HHF studio set. The railing transformed into the painted backdrop of Happy Hollow. And standing there, just beyond the flames as they caught the plastic casing of the tape, was Mr. Giggles. Not a hallucination in the periphery, but seemingly solid, life-sized, silent, his painted smile illuminated by the growing fire. Panic seized me. I stumbled back, gasping. The whispers became deafening, a cacophony of Finch's pain and the show's distorted audio. Smiling. Always smiling. Barnaby Bear's trembling hand appeared before my eyes, trying to wave goodbye. Willow's glassy eyes stared from the flames. "It won't work, Mark," a voice hissed, sounding like Finch's agony filtered through static. "The recording is inside you now. You listened. You let us in." The tape hissed and popped in the flames, melting plastic dripping like black tears. The smell was acrid, chemical. Mr. Giggles hadn't moved, just stood there, watching, smiling. It felt like the tape itself, the trauma embedded within, was fighting back, projecting its most potent images, leveraging my deepest fears. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, focusing on my breathing, trying to anchor myself in reality. It's not real. It's the tape's influence. Finch's trauma. I repeated it like a mantra. I had to break the cycle, not just destroy the object. "You're a recording," I choked out, voice trembling, speaking to the flames, to the hallucinated clown, to the whispers in my head. "You're an echo of pain. You're not real. Arthur Finch is gone. And you don't get to stay." I forced my eyes open. Mr. Giggles flickered, his form wavering like heat haze. The whispers seemed to falter for a moment, the intensity dropping slightly. The fire in the trash can roared, consuming the last of the plastic shell, melting the magnetic tape within into a useless lump. With a final, convulsive effort, I grabbed my laptop, opened it despite the screen flickering violently, and initiated a secure erase protocol on the main hard drive, targeting any lingering fragments of the captured files. The machine word protested, then went dark. As the flames died down, leaving only smoldering plastic and warped metal, the hallucination of Mr. Giggles dissolved. The oppressive weight on my chest lessened. The whispers faded, receding from a roar to a faint, distant hiss, like the sound of a disconnected channel. The nightmare wasn't gone, but it felt ejected. Severed. I collapsed onto the concrete, gasping for air, drenched in sweat, utterly spent, staring at the smoking remains of episode 47. The immediate aftermath was silence. Not the oppressive, waiting silence that had followed my first viewing, but a genuine, blessed absence of noise. The constant static whisper in my head was gone. The echoes of Barnaby's strained voice, Willow's cryptic warnings, vanished. It was like emerging from underwater, the pressure suddenly released. I was left hollowed out, exhausted, shaking like a leaf in the aftermath of a hurricane, but the psychic storm itself had passed. Destroying the tape, the digital copies, the act of confronting the hallucination and consciously rejecting its influence, it had worked. The direct, overwhelming psychic assault had stopped. But the experience left deep scars. I knew I wasn't okay, not really. The paranoia lingered, albeit muted. Sudden noises made me jump. I avoided reflections, half expecting to see that painted smile staring back. The trauma wasn't erased, just quieted. I knew I needed professional help to process not just the ordeal with the tape, but the underlying obsessive tendencies that had drawn me into this mess in the first place. The first person I called was Lisa. My voice was raspy, weak. I didn't tell her everything, the full extent of the hallucinations, the theory of infectious trauma, the terrifying confrontation on the balcony. How could I? But I told her enough. I told her the tape was deeply disturbing, that it had affected me profoundly, made me paranoid and unwell. I told her she was right, that I'd become obsessed, and that I'd destroyed the tape and everything related to it. To her credit, she didn't say I told you so. Her voice was filled with relief and concern. Oh, Mark. I was so worried. Are you sure you're all right now? No, I admitted honestly. But I'm better. I think I need to talk to someone. Professionally. She offered support, listened patiently, promised to visit soon. Reconnecting with her, with a grounding force outside the echo chamber of my obsession, felt like the first step towards actual recovery. In the following weeks, I began the slow process of cleaning up the wreckage. I deleted my posts on the Forgotten Frequencies forum, withdrawing from the lost media community entirely. The thrill of the hunt was gone, replaced by a chilling awareness of the potential darkness lurking in forgotten recordings. I boxed up unrelated VHS tapes, suddenly finding their presence unsettling. My collector's haven now felt like a potential minefield. I started therapy, unpacking the experience, my nostalgia, my anxieties. Slowly, painstakingly, I started to feel more like myself again. The shadows lessened. The fear began to recede. Months passed. Life found a new, quieter rhythm. I still worked the mundane office job, but I spent my evenings reading books, going for walks, reconnecting with friends. The VCR gathered dust. My apartment gradually shed the feeling of a haunted archive. I thought I had truly ejected the nightmare, purged the infection. Then came the digital decluttering. I was clearing out old project files on my main computer, the one I'd wiped but had eventually restored from a cloud backup made before the HHF discovery. I was deleting gigabytes of old design work, forgotten downloads, digital detritus. My finger hovered over a folder cryptically named miscellaneous_captures. I almost deleted it wholesale, but hesitated. Curiosity, that old collector's itch, flared faintly. I clicked it open. Inside were a few random video clips, screen recordings. And one tiny file, barely a megabyte, that I hadn't noticed before. It must have been created during one of the failed digitization attempts, a fragmented remnant saved automatically before a crash, missed during my frantic purge. It was labeled simply, listen.mp4. My heart gave a painful thud. Every rational part of my brain screamed, delete it. Don't look. Don't listen. But that flicker, that morbid curiosity that had led me to the tape in the first place, flared brighter. It's just a fragment, I told myself. A corrupted data scrap. What harm could it do? Against my better judgment, trembling slightly, I double-clicked the file. My media player opened. The screen remained black for a second, then flashed with 2 seconds of pure, harsh, digital static. The kind of noise that signifies nothing, an absence of signal. But within that static, perfectly clear, perfectly preserved, for less than a second, was audio. A whisper. High-pitched, sibilant, chillingly familiar. Mark. It was followed instantly by a single, sharp, unmistakable sound. The sound of a puppet's giggle, high-pitched, slightly manic, exactly like the one Chester chipmunks sometimes made, but imbued now with pure, unadulterated malice. Then the file ended. Silence. I stared at the screen, frozen. The oppressive weight, the paranoia, the terror, it all came rushing back in a dizzying wave. The physical tape was gone. Finch's immediate psychic imprint was broken. But the echo, the digital ghost, it remained. Easily copied. Easily shared. Infinitely reproducible. The nightmare hadn't been fully ejected. A fragment had survived. And it knew my name. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.